It's week 5 of the 10k programme, and we're just getting into the second half of the programme. So hope you're getting a real benefit from this and seeing yourself kind of able to run a little bit further and a little bit faster. So this week we're thinking about running downhill and uphill. The two of them always go together. And we'll talk a little bit more about running economy this week, thinking about how when you expend energy by running longer distances and so on, how does that affect your running economy? We said last week that running economy was one of the main facets of the 10k programme, and we will keep coming back to running economy as we get into the later weeks. Okay, so in the resources this week you have a couple of videos to watch, and one of them you've seen before. We saw that in week 2. It's the Sage Kennedy and Sandy Nypaver one, where they talk about running uphill, running downhill. In week 2 the focus was on running uphill, but that's also a very good video on addressing downhill running technique. So we'll do a bit of on the spot coaching during the practical session for this week, but if you have a look at that video as well, and just pay attention to what they're saying about your running form, this idea of your posture when you're running, your kinetic chain, the point load, trying to keep everything, your weight going straight down and into the ground. Okay, so that's a good one. Kirk from the Run Experience. I don't really like Kirk. I don't dislike him as a person. Obviously I don't know the guy, but I don't really like his presentation style. That's really where I'm coming from. But this is a good video. He's got good solid content in this one. So he talks about why every runner needs to do hill repeats. We talked about a bit about that in a previous week. I think it was just last week actually, how you can provoke adaptation to get your body to adapt, to improve by running hills. So look, and this is quite important, he says, look for a hill that meets your objective. Now that begs the question, what is your objective? I think maybe in the first week we talked just in the passing about how every session that you do should have an objective, and you should be able to go back to that objective at the end and say, did I actually meet my objective or didn't I? In fact, you can address that as you're going through the workout, and a kind of a dynamic appraisal of, am I currently working towards meeting the objective for this session? So that's in my coaching notes I've got in capital letters, that is the most important question in coaching. Okay, science of downhill running, the science of ultra episode. I come back to these things and say, well, it's really going into the nitty gritty of things, but if you really want to improve, you need to understand A, why you want to improve, and B, how you can improve. And there are loads of people out there on YouTube and social media that tell you, oh, this is how to do it. But ultimately, it comes back to, has it been proven? Is there evidence that what they are suggesting actually does work, has been proven to work? It's been measured, and it definitely gives the results. If not, then it's anecdotal evidence, and while there is value in it, sometimes I'll say, well, my own view is, and that's me putting my personal experience on top of the research findings, and that means that is anecdotal evidence. You can't really say that applies in all circumstances. But I think when I'm giving you my view, it's what has worked for me, and it won't necessarily work for everybody, but It works for me, just in the same way as people will post on social media and say, I tried this and it worked for me, or I tried that and it didn't work for me. Everybody's different, and we can't just say this is an absolute. Okay, so running downhill versus running uphill. So week 2 we went through the science of running uphill. Why do we take shorter strides? Because we're lifting our weight against gravity, and as well as moving forward, we're lifting up. So if we can reduce the amount we're moving forward on a hill, if we're going that much forward, we're going that much up. If we're only going that much forward, half the distance forward, we're only going half upwards. Therefore, it's using less energy. Now, if you know anything about physics, then you'll know that the energy taken to get from one position to another is the same, irrespective of whether you do it quickly over a short period or take a longer period and do it slowly by implication. And that is absolutely right. But in terms of energetics, it's not necessarily as straightforward as that, because the more you lift your body up, the quicker you're going to tire. So moving forward half the distance, going up half the distance, it isn't the same as going forward the full distance and raising up, because you're going to tire at an increased rate. So we have to take theory and apply the context, I suppose, is the best way to put it. Okay, so running downhill, the running style is the same for both. You want to be reasonably upright. One of the differences that you do have, though, and it doesn't have to be this way, the general recommendation for running downhill is that you stay upright. Your point load goes straight into the ground, and that's true. If you want to run faster downhill, or you want to run downhill more economically, then a good tip that you can have is to lean forward slightly. It's a technique that we use in chi running, and I'll explain more when we get to the practical bit. But essentially, if you're standing upright, your body the weight is going straight down into the ground. That's generally what we want. If you lean forward, then you get to a point where you overbalance and one of your feet goes forward to keep you standing up. So the idea of chi running is that you're in a perpetual state of falling over, and your body, the process of falling over means that you're moving forward, and therefore you're more economical in your running. Running downhill, leading forward, I certainly find that you go faster for the same level of effort. You might find something different. The most important thing, I think, though, is that when you're running downhill, let's go back to the running uphill. We said that was the kind of running that was least likely to lead to injury, because it was slow, relatively slow, very little in terms of impact forces. When you're running downhill, your whole body weight is coming down. Instead of working against gravity, gravity is pulling you down. And if you're running downhill quickly, you could be hitting the ground with 8 times your body weight. So yes, running downhill, you do need to be careful. It can put extra strain, it does put extra strain onto your calf muscles. They're the parts that are going to get tired and start to get a little bit sore. First, going uphill, it's your quads. Yes, so the impact, it can also have a bearing on your knee, and that's really where this idea of point load, having your weight coming straight down into the ground, becomes really important. If your knee is forward of your leg, then that weight isn't going straight to the ground, it's going ahead of your foot. Therefore your knee is working harder to keep you upright. And because you've got a multiplier of your body weight, it's having to work extra hard. So definitely in the early stages, when you're getting acclimatized to running downhill, I wouldn't do the lean forward. I would just try and keep yourself upright. Do what Sage says. The impact also increases as gradient increases. So if you imagine a very shallow hill, you're not pulling so much against gravity. Again, going back to going uphill, if you're taking a baby step up the way to avoid working against gravity, if it's a shallow hill and you're going down, then the extra that you're working with gravity isn't quite so much for every stride. But if you're going down a really steep one, then you're really working hard against or with gravity. Gravity is really pulling you down. So yes, you need to be aware of the forces, and over time, your joints, your body will adapt to it. The more you run down hills, it's not just a case of the easier it becomes, but the more your body adapts to cope with these stresses and strains, and then you can really start to push the envelope. The repetitive, in my notes here, I've got the repetitive impact and eccentric contraction can lead to muscle damage. Now, we talked a little bit about eccentric contraction last week when we had the video of the guy doing his exercise where he was leaning forward, and just as he was about to fall, he pulled himself back up. So this eccentric is lengthening your muscle as you're going down. Concentric is when you're shortening the muscle, coming back up again. This is a concentric contraction, that's eccentric, and you do get more benefit from holding a weight and restricting the degree to which you relax. You get more from that than you do picking up a weight and pulling up the weight. So because you're continually having this eccentric contraction as your muscles are lengthening and contracting again, that can lead to muscle damage. But that backs up what I was just saying about taking it relatively gently to begin with, and then as you get more experienced and you've been exposed more to running down hills, your body strengthens, then that becomes less of a concern. Okay, fatigue. The longer the distance, the greater the central fatigue. Central fatigue is a relatively easy concept. It's the way that your body drives all your contractions. So it's your central nervous system that's looking at that. So your muscles might still have the ability to contract, but your nervous system might have reached a state where it's not happy for that. And we know that because we have taken people, elite athletes, to a point of absolute exhaustion. They just cannot, under any circumstances, do any more. And yet a biopsy of their muscles shows that they've still got enough in reserve to carry on with that activity for about another 8 minutes. I suppose that's maybe the reserve in case the saber-toothed tiger jumps out from behind a hedge and starts chasing you. The eccentric load they talk about as being the main cause of DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness. Whenever we stretch and contract our muscles, this is basic stuff that we cover in Couch to 5K, you get micro tears of your muscles. Some scientists say, no, that's not really true. You don't have micro tears. It's just that the fibres in your muscles, which are normally parallel and in straight lines, they get overstressed and they kind of become a bundled, like a pot of spaghetti, you know, they're all intertwisted and so on. Whatever, that's this random orientation is what causes the soreness. the damage that you've done, and we need to leave time for these that kind of damage to let your fibres go back into parallel, which is why a massage gun really works so well. Reduction in force that you have when you've been doing running downhill, particularly over a long period, can be 20 to 25%. But importantly, it doesn't matter how far it degrades, your muscles will never, ever, ever, ever run out of the ability to contract. That's an interesting thing. Okay, energetic cost. This is really talking about the further that you go. Now, the science of this, the person who's given the talk, does make it quite clear that the science of this and research is still at the early stages, and it's difficult to come up with any firm conclusions about how all this works. But there's enough there to give us a general understanding. So we can all understand, common sense, that as a workload increases, then your economy is going to fall, you're going to tire, your ability to keep yourself upright, that good running form, does decay, and you tend to slouch and lose it. You're going to require more oxygen because not only are you running, you're running in terrain that's not flat. So for the same distance, you're using more energy. But also, on top of that, you've got the micro damage that we just talked about. And as this happens, the muscles become less efficient. So therefore, you need more energy to get the same results from your muscles. So that's interesting in itself. Where the uncertainty comes is in the kind of terrain that we run on. Again, last week we talked about running economy, how the degree to which that degrades as your run goes on in distance depends on the terrain that you're doing. You know, the elevation. Is it rocky and stony? Is it old tree roots that you're having to jump over? Or is it kind of flat gravel, such as you might have at parkrun? So we're not really sure how much that affects the degree to which you lose that running form. However, what we can say, and again this is really repeating part of last week, your running economy degrades because you're not really used to doing that. You know, people that run ultramarathons, they get towards the end and they're still able to keep it because they're used to doing 50 to 100 mile runs. Same with, you look at marathon runners, they're doing a marathon in just over 2 hours and their form is absolutely perfect all the way to the finish. They don't seem to get tired or lose their form. Their running economy stays exemplary. That's because they probably run a marathon every day. Their body is really, really used to it. It knows what it's doing. Until we are at that stage, which is going to be the case for almost everybody likely to be doing the 10k course, we have to be aware that our bodies are not used to running. This week you're going to be running, I think it's about 7.5k, with a bit of hill in it. Last week you did 7k without any real hills, and that was really pretty straightforward. This week it's going to be a different kettle of fish. Even though you're only going to go a little bit further, we still classify it as a 7k run. So training, as you go on, it helps your body to become more able to cope with new conditions, new challenges. And from that perspective, it's important that when we're doing training, we don't just train for what we expect to encounter in a particular run or race. We need to think what could happen. So we've heard of races where the going was quite good a few days before the race, but then torrential thunderstorms hit and there was slips. So instead of having a nice easy path, you're having to run through mud, maybe climb over bits of mud. I recall one time we were in Falkland Estate and there was a big landslip after maybe a couple of weeks of rain. Massive landslip, and it came down and blocked the road and kept going downhill, and it blocked the next part of the road. The road went round in a long hairpin, and the intensity was such that both uphill and at the bottom of the hill, it was just a quagmire. You wouldn't have recognised it as being a road. So yes, we want to train keeping in mind that things aren't always going to be the way that we expect them to be. So training, how much should you do downhill? And we talked about how much speed work should we do last week. And we said, well, you don't want to do it any more than once or twice a week, and limit it until you become more proficient. Then you can start to increase it. So the damage from eccentric contractions when you're going downhill, that can last 2 or 3 weeks. And I think interestingly, the soreness from this doesn't come on right away. It can be up to 4 days before your recovery can really start. So the aim, in my notes here, says the aim is to get DOMS, but not to the extent that it gets worse in days 2 and 3. You want to get a little bit of DOMS. In my experience, it doesn't come on in day 1, it's day 2, not the day after your run. You might get a little bit, but it really becomes prominent the day after, so 2 days after. But you don't want it to go on 2 or 3 days after that. If that's the case, then your workout was too hard. We want to have recovery from DOMS before you do another session. That has to be paramount. If you don't do that, if you go out and you run when your body is still a little bit sore from your last run, you're really asking for trouble. Because remember, the DOMS is they're really showing you the level to which you're getting this micro damage. So the more the DOMS, the more damage you've done in your last workout. So if you go out and do another one while you're still getting sorted out from the previous one, then you're doing damage on top of damage, which is really bad news. When we're first starting, they reckon it's going to take 10 days to 15 days recovery time to be totally recovered from it. That doesn't mean to say you've got to wait for 2 weeks between stints of running downhill. It's just saying, well, during that 2 weeks, be a little bit, I was going to say cautious, but maybe not even be cautious, but be more aware of the need to be cautious. The more you're aware, the more likely you are to identify problems. And you really need to identify these problems and train accordingly. Injuries come when you get warning signs and you ignore them. Once you get used to all of it, recovery time comes down to about a week. Now this is for hard downhill running. It's not just an easy run downhill such as we do in a group session. This is you going 8/10. You're running down this hill, you're in a race, and you're really pounding the trails. If you're doing that, then limit that to no more than once a week. Okay, tips and action points. Well, form, as always. Maintain your form. Maintain your cadence, the number of steps you take per minute. Maintain that, irrespective of how slow you're running. So if you're going uphill, you're taking baby steps, you should be taking the same number of steps as when you're running on the flat. If you're bombing downhill, even at your highest speed, your cadence should still be the same as you would when you're running flat. Do specific training for downhill and uphill running. The two are entirely different, and the two are entirely different from running on the flat. Running up and downhill on the tarmac is entirely different to running up and downhill on gnarly trails. So do specific training. Within reason, the longer the session, the better the session, the more benefit you're going to get from it. If you're planning on doing a specific race, then what kind of kit are you wearing for that? If it's a long one, you might have a backpack with a hydration bladder in it, something like that. You might be carrying some nutrition, you might be carrying weatherproof clothing. Train with that. Otherwise, when you come to your event, this is going to be unexpected. Yeah? Train for the unexpected. Then remember the golden rule: set an objective for every workout that you do. So think what it is that you're planning to do, go out and do it, and then reflect on what you actually did, and did it match up to your objectives. Okay, so there we are, that's your coaching notes for week 5. I hope you'll enjoy the practical session, and we'll see you out there.